Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your hurricane outlook and discussion. It's the last day of the month of June, June 30th, 2021, and the big topic here is the potential for a hurricane in the Caribbean. And I do not use those bold headlines lightly, and I don't use them often, and this is a case where we could be looking at the potential for a hurricane in the Caribbean Sea and maybe beyond. So let's get on with it and talk about what we know, what we don't know, and what to look for. I think that's a good plan of attack. All right, so starting with the National Hurricane Center homepage, real quick over here, I do not want to ignore Enrique over in the Gulf of California, still bringing some showers and heavier rain bands from time to time to this area, but it's a tropical depression, so no worries in terms of any big impacts, although the heavy rain can cause big impacts depending on where you are and where that heavy rain falls. Enrique forecast to eventually dissipate here over the Baja Peninsula, and that will be it. Still a few swells out there and other minor impacts over a relatively small area, so that'll pretty much do it for Enrique. In the Atlantic Basin, this yellow X sitting over the Windward Islands this afternoon is of consequence despite the fact that it says development chance or formation chance. Both at the 48 and 120 hour marks, 0. That's just looking at it becoming a tropical cyclone. That doesn't mean there are no impacts, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. And if you're down there, you already know. You know what I'm going to tell you. Then east of there, Invest Area 97L, and it is on its way to becoming a tropical depression. All it needs is a well-defined circulation and deeper thunderstorm activity, or what we call convection, and this will be our next depression and eventually named storm, and the name will be Elsa once it gets that, and I think it's only a matter of time. So here's what we've got out there. This right here is 95L, and it is definitely bringing some squally weather from Barbados all the way down to the rest of the Windward Islands here. Not quite reaching Trinidad and Tobago, maybe a few scattered showers there. We'll take a close-up of this in a minute. But this is what I'm talking about. These tropical waves come off Africa. They may or may not develop, but that envelope of energy is pretty big and is bringing gusty wind to some areas, heavy showers here and there. I mean, yeah, you got to pay attention to this. And even the northern extent of it now moving through the Virgin Islands, headed towards Puerto Rico. So, be mindful of this. The wave of energy has a bit of time left until it passes. And so you guys down there, hunker down, whatever. Bring the lawn furniture in. Take the cabana umbrellas down. Small craft remain in port, all that good stuff. Because these tropical waves can cause problems. All right? Then there's 97L, and I think you can clearly see it right there, winding up fairly significantly. I mean, look, it's already got the banding overall structure to it. It just lacks a little bit more organization, and if it weren't for this dry Saharan air to the north and, the marginal sea surface temperatures down here, I mean, they're warm enough, but they could get warmer, and they certainly will as the season progresses. But because it's June and not July or August, the end of those months, 30 days later, 60 days later, this would already be a hurricane more than likely. So what's going to happen with it? Well, we'll get to that in just a moment. First, real quick, just some scattered showers and thunderstorms south and east of the Bahamas, disturbed weather in the Gulf of Mexico and the Bay of Campeche and southwest Gulf. None of those areas showing any organization, no what we call bundling of the energy at the surface. All right? So let's take a close-up look here, courtesy of the Weather Nerds site. Look at this. I love the GLM lightning flash counter. All these little yellow speckles you see in here represent lightning strikes. And some of these storms are now on the northern extent of the wave, moving through the Virgin Islands, all the way down through Antigua, Guadeloupe, and St. Lucia, Barbados, and maybe even just a little bit earlier today, passing through and close to Trinidad and Tobago. And if you're down there, you know how these tropical waves can bring you some serious impacts, flooding rain, gusty winds, flash flooding. They really can cause problems. These are seedlings to hurricanes, for goodness sakes. So, of course, they have impacts with them. Then, obviously, the rotation here with 97L, very evident. Wow, this is really interesting to see, especially so early in the season out this way. This is in that main development region down in the deep tropics. We typically do not see anything this robust this early in the season. It's happened, but it's not a usual thing. Maybe it's becoming more usual. Maybe. We'll have to wait a few more years to know. But there it is, really starting to wind up there, and it's on its way to becoming probably our next named storm, and there's a lot to watch with it as we go forward over the next few days. So looking at the vorticity signatures of our various players, there's Enrique. I think that's the leftovers of Danny sitting over Tennessee there. I could be wrong, but that might be the leftover weak vorticity signature. It could be up here too. Who knows? But there's 95L, that tropical wave, some energy with it going through the islands. And then there's that signature. Boy, this is exactly what we look for. That's it right there. I'll click on it and zoom in for you. Show you what I'm talking about. That's the signature. That's the telltale sign of the energy bundling around a common low pressure area in the tropics, the conservation of angular momentum, the focusing of the heat down there, the banded showers and thunderstorms. That's it. That's the blueprint of a tropical cyclone in the making. And it's heading into an area and moving through an area where there's not too much in the way of wind shear. This is a tendency map, decreasing and increasing, instead of necessarily what the total shear is. But overall, not a bad pattern for this to develop in, with shear generally on the decrease down there. Shear, just in case, you hear it a lot. What is shear? Shear is the change of wind direction for one reason or another with height. And the most common shear is when you've got a tropical wave coming this way and strong upper level winds coming this way, and they run into each other like that, kind of like scissors, and you get that shearing effect. It shears off, those upper level winds shear off the tops of the thunderstorms and don't allow the process to continue. So the shear profile down here, quite favorable, looking at the analysis for 97L to continue to develop. The other thing that is fairly favorable as well, water temperatures and the upper ocean heat content all through this region are only going to increase. So as this moves west with time, it will feel warmer and warmer water temperatures underneath, and those warmer water temperatures lead to more evaporation, more latent heat down in the lower part of the atmosphere. That is the fuel for these things to thrive off of, and it'll be entering an area of more of that upper ocean heat content, higher values of it in the days ahead. That's another positive for development. So that's something to put into the check mark, the column for yes, it could develop. Then let's look at the guidance. This is the afternoon guidance, and this is a really neat website here from the UCAR site and part of NCAR and UCAR and all that. I can't remember off the top of my head what it stands for, so I apologize, but lots of different model plots out here, different sites that do that. Levi Cowan, of course, has it at Tropical Tidbits, and there's other sites as well. The SpaghettiModels.com, I think, has plots, and it's really understanding what you're looking at, how to interpret this. And I look at this and think, all right, we got all these. First, let me use a color that we can all see. We got all these different models over here on the right. That's the legend. And the tops are generally thought of as the consensus models. And then your various hurricane-specific models, the HMON and the HWRF, the Canadian, I believe this is the Euro interpolated, I think, if I remember correctly, the AVN, which is the GFS interpolated. And then your various TCLP, what is that? Climatology and persistence. That's just like, forget about it. Don't even look at that one. It's a no-skill model. And then your various beta and advection models, so forth and so on. And then the X-trap, which is just like if you extrapolated it out, a no-skill model. So there you go. What does it mean, though? Well, look, the overall envelope is generally towards the Caribbean first, the islands down there, then the Greater Antilles over here. More than likely, it looks like the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico won't have much in the way of impacts from this, except maybe any northern side that happens to get going. That's not a guarantee. We're still talking 3, 4, maybe 5 days out. I doubt it that far out, but maybe. We'll see that Puerto Rico and vicinity doesn't have to be too concerned with this. More concerned for the Greater Antilles over here, after we have the possible impacts. I mean, it's going to happen. 100% chance of impacts for the islands over here. So what kind of impacts would those be? We'll get to that too. First, the Gfs Ensemble. Now, this is a very useful tool, the Gfs Ensemble track. And again, look at it in the near term, a very tightly clustered envelope. You can kind of draw a cone around it like I've done. And then look what happens after that. You get this pretty big divergence in the guidance covering a huge area here of a lot of different possible outcomes. Several of the members of the ensemble bring this up through the Greater Antilles and well off the southeast coast. A pretty good chunk of them bring it into the Gulf of Mexico. So really no, and that's expected. We're talking 5, there's some 144s in there, that's 6 days out. That's a long ways out. And this is what's expected. But in the shorter term, the next 3 to 5 days, that little envelope right there is worth noting that first through the Caribbean islands, probably the central part of the Lesser Antilles, and then somewhere towards Hispaniola and or southeast Cuba would make the most likely sense as to where this goes next. What about intensity? Here too, a bit of a divergence in the modeling. For the first, let's call it 72 hours or so, right through this point here, fairly good agreement that this intensifies steadily, most of the modeling agreeing that it becomes a hurricane, most of it. Then you start to really diverge there. The H-Wharf model, Cat 3 hurricane, other models, right off the cliff, and really weaken it for various reasons. Some of them might be seeing land interaction or drier air, maybe stronger upper level winds. There's a whole bunch of factors to take into consideration. But in the near term, it's almost certain that this becomes a formidable tropical storm and maybe even a hurricane. I would say there's a pretty good shot at this becoming a hurricane looking at this. But it's not a guarantee. Nothing's a guarantee when it comes to the weather unless you look outside and it's raining. And then you say it's 100% chance of rain, right? But the modeling is generally on board that this system develops and becomes at least a tropical storm for the Caribbean down there, so Barbados and vicinity. And we'll look at this closer in a moment. I'll kind of wrap up the discussion part, anticipating what impacts to expect and where. But first, let's look at the various models in terms of the global. So this is the GFS, Global Forecast System, 5,000 feet up in the atmosphere. The same basic chart or layer of the atmosphere that this is, the vorticity signature. So whereas this is an analysis, opening the window, looking down on the Earth from the satellite, and analyzing it and saying, whoop, here's some colors, whatever. Now let's see the vorticity. It's just like doctors use X-rays and MRIs and other diagnostic tools. This is our diagnostic tool to tell us, oh, it looks pretty healthy. And that, plus a lot of other information, gets ingested into the model. And here you go. Now, here's your output. So the GFS has a fairly good handle, seemingly, on the vorticity signature of the system. It is south of a large area of high pressure that itself is oriented fairly far to the south here. Later in the summer, this will migrate more to the north, and these systems will track along farther to the north. But right now, it's kind of squashed down here south of 10 degrees latitude, which is interesting and for a number of reasons. But nevertheless, that's the setup for the GFS. All right, so let's move this out to 24 hours. Thursday morning, more than likely a tropical depression at that point in time, if not a tropical storm. Another 24 hours. This is 48 hours, Friday morning. That is definitely the signature of a well-developed tropical cyclone in the model. I mean, I've seen it enough times. You've seen it enough times. We know what we're looking at. And then there's your ridge of high pressure. And this is the key. It really is. How big does this dome of air become? How much does it ebb and flow, inhale and exhale? That determines where these systems end up. So for now, it's headed towards the islands down here as a strengthening tropical cyclone, at least according to the model. Let's move it out to another 72 hours. I'm sorry, 272 hours, another 24. Now we're at 72 hours. Saturday morning, it is at least comfortably south of Puerto Rico. And let me just switch the domain, if you will, over to the Western Atlantic. And just real quick, because it's important, hats off, if I had a hat, to Levi Cowan for programming this site to make it this easy. Big round of applause. I'm dead serious. I know he works out at the Joint Typhoon Warning Center as a senior forecaster there, and he's got a PhD now. This guy went from Alaska and the dreams and aspirations of doing exactly what he wanted to do, and yet he still programmed this amazing site. And I know I appreciate it, so I just wanted to make that clear. I mean, look, I can just jump over to the domain and the map extent showing a closer shot, and I think that's cool. All right, back to the program here. Comfortably south of Puerto Rico, hopefully, but that is a well-developed cyclone in the model, all right? Just looking at this layer, and we can look at more as time goes on. I'll go into more detail later, maybe looking at the upper levels and the moisture and the humidity and all that. But for now, if it doesn't look good here, I don't worry about it. And this really looks healthy. That is a healthy cyclone in the modeling here. Again, this is Saturday morning now, July 3rd. Then it gets tangled up over Haiti there, which would just be bad because the rainfall down there causes a lot of issues. Maybe going across, now we're out at 102, 108, 114, 120. So by day 5, possibly tangled up here near Cuba. A big rainmaker through this swath, and that in and of itself could be a major disaster. It really could. The heavy rain down there can cause tremendous problems. Make no mistake about it. Now, the key as to what happens next is how strong this ridge is out here to the east. And let's go back to the broader picture real quick. And you can really see that. The outline of that huge subtropical ridge, that's the key. Everything lies with that. Not everything, but most of it. That gets a little bigger, a little stronger. It's like a big balloon. It inflates a little bit more, and what would be Elsa there gets shoved more to the south, and it cruises through the Caribbean without much land interaction. And we could play if all day long. And by the way, that's what the ensembles do. They play if, and that's why I have all those different runs. I don't have all day to go through the 20 different scenarios or whatever. But just a few, just to throw it out there. This is what I look at. If that area of high pressure is a little bit more north or a little bit deflated, what we call the heights are lower and other meteorological stuff, then it could go right over the islands. Maybe even Puerto Rico. That's possible, but certainly more land interaction would mean less of a system left over if there was going to be any U.S. impacts later on. So it's still early. We need a couple of more days before we can look into the future where it might enter the Southeast Gulf or anything like that. Now, I know you guys will go look at the GFS out to 16 days. And I don't have any problem with that. And even if I did, who am I to tell you what to do? Just be educated about what you're looking at and understand the limitations of it. And if you see it, going into Florida or up the East Coast or whatever, this storm or another storm, beyond 5 days, and it's affecting you, and you're like, oh, just look at that as a sign. All right, I probably should pay attention to this. I think it's a good thing. It gets you aware. And so let's just try to be positive about it. Now, let's compare it to the Euro real quick. This is every 24 hours, so this is our initial start. Fairly decent representation. This might be underdoing it just a little bit. I think the current conditions of what 97L looks like at the 850 level is stronger than what the Euro initializes, but whatever. Let's move it out 24 hours. It does intensify it into a tropical cyclone, it looks like. 48 hours, practically over Barbados. And then by 72, boom, right over Hispaniola. A little bit of a weaker and more eastward oriented ridge out here. And so it gains more latitude and comes into Hispaniola. And then eventually at day 4, not much left at all right there through the Bahamas around the backside of the high as this trough comes in. And it becomes a non-event for the most part after a potential big event in the islands and as well as Hispaniola. So a pretty big change there. Look, there's day 5 on the Euro, and there's day 5. Let's get these matched up on the GFS. Yep, that's a pretty big difference there. in terms of where it ends up. All right? All right, so for you folks down in the islands, any kind of a track with this system through this area right through here, let's just say, would bring conditions that are not quite, pleasant. I think we could all agree. Barbados, down here to St. Vincent, the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Martinique, Dominica, maybe even as far south as Grenada and as far north as Guadeloupe. We don't know for sure yet, but you folks down here, be ready. You know the drill, and I want to just kind of zoom in just a little bit. I like this map. It comes off of the tracking map from the HurricaneTrack Insider site, and you can really look and see here, there is relief down here, what we call terrain and mountains and hills. It's volcanic, remember? You should know this. So any big-time heavy rain can cause a lot of problems. It's not just the wind, it's not just the big waves. Rainfall down here can be pretty problematic, and that is certainly the case over here, especially in Haiti, all right? And, certain parts of the Dominican Republic, you can get a lot of rain in there. More flat on the southeast side. But this is why it matters where this ends up. And, whether or not it's a hurricane, whatever. I know people pay attention to that word, hurricane. Wow, that really gets people's attention. But just a tropical wave can be almost as problematic, at least from a rainfall perspective. And then you start adding on all the other problems, the wind, the storm surge, right? We all have to understand what we're up against. And the first area to be impacted looks like it will be the Windward Islands. So let's not forget that. All right. Connect and follow, please, if you like. Sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice all of a sudden. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification button there. I guess it's a bell. I haven't even looked lately. And that way when I post a video, you'll know. And we are supported by an awesome group of people around the world on Patreon, crowdfunding the future of our coverage, our field coverage. You have access to the maps, the live cameras, blogs, insight, you name it. And it's just a really neat thing. Patreon.com/HurricaneTrack. Over 600 people helping to support what we're doing. And some of them have been around even before we had Patreon in the old HurricaneTrack Premium Services days. And it really helps us to do some great stuff. So that's what we do, how we're connected, so forth and so on. All right, lots to keep up with. That is for sure. If you got questions, hit me up on the YouTube comments there, and I'll try to answer what I can. And talk amongst yourselves. I think everybody's pretty civil on YouTube, and that's pretty remarkable, especially this day and age. So keep that going. Keep the positivity flowing, and we will see what develops. All right? Have a great rest of your Wednesday afternoon. As always, thanks for tuning in and giving me a piece of your day. From whatever device you happen to be watching from, I do appreciate it more than you know. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. We'll be back, and we'll talk about it some more tomorrow.